I didn't notice the sound at first. That's the part that scares me most now. It had probably been there for weeks before I finally heard it. And once I heard it, I couldn't stop. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I lived alone in a rented house on the edge of a small town in rural Pennsylvania. The kind of town where the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away and the trees grow so thick around the property that by October, you can't see the road from the front porch. I moved there after a bad breakup. I wanted silence. I wanted to disappear into the kind of quiet that a city apartment never gives you. I got silence. I got too much of it. The house was old. Built in the 1940s, the landlord told me, with that proud smile people wear when they talk about old things like age alone makes something valuable. The walls were thick plaster. The floors were original hardwood that creaked in the same 3 spots every single time, no matter how carefully you stepped. The basement had a door that didn't lock properly and had to be held shut with a wooden chair wedged under the handle. The landlord said he'd fix it. He never did. I moved in during August. By September, I had settled into a routine. Work from home, long walks in the afternoon, dinner alone, a book or a movie, then bed around 11. Simple. Quiet. Exactly what I thought I wanted. The first time I heard the sound, I was lying in bed reading. It was maybe 2 in the morning. I'd lost track of time the way you do when a book is good. The house was completely still. No wind. No animals outside. Just that deep, pressurized silence that old houses have at night, the kind that feels almost solid. And then I heard it. A slow, rhythmic sound. Coming from inside the wall to my left. The wall that separated my bedroom from the narrow hallway that ran along the side of the house. It sounded like breathing. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just slow, measured, in and out. The kind of breathing a person does when they're trying very hard to stay quiet. When they're controlling themselves. When they don't want to be heard, but they can't quite stop the body from doing what it needs to do. I sat up. I stared at the wall. The sound stopped. I told myself it was pipes. Old houses have pipes that make strange sounds. I'd heard that before. I almost believed it. I turned off the light and lay there in the dark for a long time, listening. Nothing. Just silence. Eventually I slept. The next night, I heard it again. Same time. Same wall. Same slow, careful breathing. This time I didn't move. I lay completely still and I listened. I counted the breaths. In for 3 seconds. Out for 4. Pause. In for 3. Out for 4. It was so regular it almost had a pattern to it. Almost like someone meditating. Staying calm. Staying still. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that very firmly. In the morning, I walked the hallway. I pressed my palm flat against the plaster wall and tried to feel for gaps or hollow sections. The wall felt solid. There were no obvious cracks. No spaces where a person could fit. I measured with my eyes. The hallway was maybe 3 feet wide. The wall had to be at least 6 inches of plaster and lath. There was no room. No way. I was being ridiculous. I went about my day. I worked. I ate. I watched a movie I didn't really watch. I went to bed. At 2 a.m., the breathing came back. This time I got up. I walked to the wall. I pressed my ear flat against the cold plaster, and I listened. It was right there. Right on the other side. Slow. Steady. In. Out. And then, as my ear pressed against the wall, whatever was on the other side went completely silent. Like it heard me move. Like it knew I was listening. I stepped back. My heart was hammering. I turned on every light in the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed until morning, watching the wall. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I called the landlord the next day. I tried to explain it calmly, rationally. Sounds in the wall. Maybe plumbing, maybe an animal got in somehow. Could he send someone to look? He said sure, he'd get around to it. He did not get around to it. I started sleeping with the light on. I started keeping my phone charged and on the nightstand. I started going to bed earlier so I'd be deeply asleep by 2 a.m., as if sleeping through it made it not real. It didn't work. I started waking up at exactly 2 a.m. anyway. My body learned the schedule. I would snap awake in the dark, heart already pounding, and lie there waiting, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the breathing would start. 3 weeks into this, I decided to do something I am not proud of. I got a stethoscope. I ordered it online. I'm not a doctor, but I grew up in a house with a nurse mother and I knew how to use one. I waited. On a Thursday night, at 1:45 a.m., I sat in a chair I'd placed next to the wall and I held the stethoscope against the plaster and I waited. At 2:03, it started. Through the stethoscope, it was completely different. Louder. Clearer. Unmistakably, undeniably human. I could hear the wet, soft quality of real lungs. The slight congestion of real nasal passages. The tiny involuntary sounds a living person makes between breaths. A faint swallow. A slow shift of weight. I pulled the stethoscope away and I stood very still. And then I heard something I had not heard in any of the previous nights. A voice. Barely above a whisper. Coming directly through the wall, so close it felt like it was pressed to the plaster on the other side, inches from my face. It said, very softly, asterisk, I know you can hear me now. Asterisk. I left the house that night. I drove to a motel 2 towns over and I sat in the parking lot for an hour before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to check in. I called the police in the morning. I told them everything. They searched the house, the walls, the attic, the basement, the crawlspace under the floors. They found a space. Behind the plaster of that hallway wall. Someone, a long time ago, had framed a narrow cavity into the interior of the house. Maybe 18 inches deep, running the full length of the hall. It had been sealed over and plastered. You'd never know it was there from the outside. Inside they found a sleeping bag. A water bottle. A small pile of food wrappers. A flashlight with the batteries run almost dead. And a small hole, no bigger than a quarter, drilled at exactly the height of a standing person's mouth. Positioned perfectly to face my bedroom wall. They never found who put those things there. They never found who had been inside. The landlord claimed he knew nothing about the cavity. Maybe he was telling the truth. The case went cold within a few months. I never went back to that house. I threw away most of what I owned rather than go back inside for it. But here's what I still think about, even now, years later. That voice said, I know you can hear me now, present tense. Now. As if before that moment, I hadn't been able to hear clearly enough. As if using the stethoscope had been the change. The thing that crossed a threshold. What I keep asking myself, in the dark, when I can't sleep, is this. If I had never used the stethoscope that night, if I had never pressed my ear to that wall and listened closely enough to really hear, would it still be in there? Would it still be breathing? Would it still be waiting for me to finally, truly listen? I think it would. I think it might still be there now, in that house, in that wall, in that dark narrow space, breathing slowly and quietly and patiently. Waiting for the next person who moves and looking for silence. Waiting for the night they press their ear to the wall and hear something they can never unhear. Waiting to say those 7 words again. I know you can hear me now. The night it started, I had been home alone for 6 days. My husband was overseas for work. Business trip, 2 weeks, nothing unusual. We'd done it before. I was fine with being alone. I grew up alone, an only child in a quiet house, and solitude never scared me. If anything, I liked it. No noise. No schedule. Just me and the house on the hill and the long gravel driveway winding down to the road below. We live on about 3 acres. The nearest house is a 5-minute drive. The driveway is steep and curved so you can hear cars coming up long before you can see them. You can hear the sound of tires on gravel all the way from the road. On the 6th night, I was in bed reading around 11. Clear night. No wind. The kind of cold October silence that makes you feel the house is wrapped in something solid. I heard tires on gravel. I put the book down. I listened. The sound got closer, then stopped. Whoever it was had pulled partway up the driveway and stopped. Not at the top, where the house was. Halfway up. In the dark section between the tree line and the first curve. I waited for the sound to start again. For them to either continue up or back out to the road. Nothing. Silence. I got up and went to the front bedroom window, the one that faces the driveway. From there, at night, you can see the upper section clearly, but the lower section disappears into the trees. I couldn't see the car. I couldn't see any headlights. But I could feel it there. The way you feel a presence in a room even before you see a person. I picked up my phone and called my husband. Different time zone, but he answered. I told him. He said it was probably someone who had taken a wrong turn, pulled up a bit to look at the map on their phone, and would leave soon. He was right. That was almost certainly what it was. I knew he was right. I went back to bed. An hour later I got up to get water from the kitchen. The kitchen window also faces the driveway. I looked out without turning the kitchen light on. The car was still there. I could see the outline now. Dark colored, maybe blue or black. Parked at an angle on the slope. No lights on. Engine off. Just sitting there in the dark at the edge of my property with its nose pointed up toward my house. I went back to my husband on the phone. He was less calm this time. He said, call the police. Non-emergency line. Just report it. I called. They said they'd send a patrol car to check the road. An officer drove past 20 minutes later. He radioed back that he didn't see any vehicle parked along the road or on any driveway. He drove the length of the road, he said. Nothing. I looked out the window. The car was gone. I told myself it had left while the officer was on his way. That made sense. I slept with the bedroom door locked and the hall light on. The next night, the car came back. Same time. A little after 11. Tires on gravel, halfway up, then silence. I turned off every light in the house and sat in the front bedroom in total darkness and watched the window. After about 20 minutes, a door opened. Not the house. The car. I saw the dome light flash briefly, far down the driveway in the dark. Then it went out. And there was a figure. Standing still at the edge of the tree line. Just standing there, facing the house. I did not breathe. I sat in the dark and I watched that figure stand at the bottom of my driveway for 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It didn't leave. It just stood in the dark between the trees and faced the house. At 12:19 a.m., it got back in the car. The car backed down to the road. The taillights disappeared. I called the police. A car came. They searched the property with flashlights. Nothing. In the morning, I walked down the driveway to where I'd seen the figure standing. The gravel was disturbed. And there were boot prints in the soft dirt at the edge of the tree line. Large. pointing uphill toward the house. I sent photos to my husband. He flew home 2 days early. The car came back one more time, 3 nights later. This time my husband saw it too. He went outside. He walked down the driveway. The car's headlights came on and it reversed fast, tires spitting gravel, and disappeared. We never saw it again. We installed cameras. We added motion lights. Nothing ever came back on camera. But here's the part one haven't told anyone until now. The morning after the last time I saw the figure standing in my driveway, I found something on the front porch. A folded piece of paper under the welcome mat. Just a small square of white paper, folded twice. On it, written in pencil in small, neat handwriting, were the words, *7 windows. I counted 7, *. Our house has 7 windows facing the front. I don't know when it was left. I don't know how they got to the porch without triggering the sensor light. I don't know how many nights they had been there before I first heard the tires on the gravel. I don't know what the counting meant. What they were deciding. What number would have been enough. We moved the following spring. We didn't tell the new owners. I still check driveways. Every time I'm driving at night and I see a car parked on a slope with its lights off and its nose pointed toward a house, I slow down. I look. I wonder if the person inside that house can feel what I felt. That particular, specific cold that settles in the center of your chest when you understand that someone has been watching you from the dark, counting the windows, and deciding something. I wonder if they know how long it might have been going on before they heard the tires. I wonder if they know that the part that should scare them most isn't the car they can see. It's all the nights they slept peacefully and never heard a sound. I moved into the apartment building on a Sunday in March. 3rd floor. Unit 3B. The building was quiet, well maintained, and almost entirely empty. The landlord mentioned that several units had turned over recently and that the building was in the middle of being re-tenanted. There were only 2 other occupied units when I arrived. One on the ground floor, an older woman named Margaret who waved at me once in the lobby and never spoke again. One on the 2nd floor that the landlord only mentioned briefly, a young guy, keeps to himself, very quiet, no trouble. I never saw the young guy. Not once. But I knew he was there because of the sounds. Not scary sounds, at first. Normal sounds. Footsteps above me, then I remembered I was on the 3rd floor, so that made no sense, but below me. Footsteps below me, the particular creak of floorboards in motion. The sound of a cabinet opening and closing. The distant sound of water running. Normal neighbor sounds. The kind you tune out because they mean nothing. The building was so quiet otherwise that these sounds became a kind of company. I'd hear him moving around in the evenings, going about his evening the way I was going about mine, and it made the building feel less empty. Less like I was alone in a structure that was mostly unoccupied. I introduced myself to Margaret about 2 weeks in. We had a short, polite conversation in the lobby. She told me she'd lived there 8 years. I asked about the neighbor on the 2nd floor, the young guy. Just making conversation. She looked at me with an expression I didn't immediately understand. She said there was no one on the 2nd floor. I told her the landlord had mentioned a tenant. Unit 2B, I thought. A young man. She shook her head. She said 2B had been empty for months. Everyone on the 2nd floor had moved out by the end of January. She said it firmly, with the certainty of someone who had lived in a building long enough to know exactly who came and went. I thought she was confused. No offense to her, she was in her 70s, and people mix up details. I went to the landlord. I asked him directly about the tenant in 2B. He paused. He looked at his leasing records. He said 2B had been vacant since December. I said I heard someone in there every evening. He shrugged. Old building. Sounds travel strangely in old buildings. Could be me. Could be Margaret. Could be the pipes. He offered to let me into 2B to confirm it was empty. I said yes. The apartment was empty. Clean, freshly painted, a little cold from the window they'd left cracked for air circulation. No furniture, no personal items, no signs that anyone was living there. I walked through each room. Kitchen, bathroom, the single bedroom. In the bedroom, there was a small area near the window where the carpet had been walked on recently enough that the fibers were flattened in a path. From the window to the door. As if someone had paced that distance, back and forth, many times. The rest of the carpet still had the slight raised texture of a room no one used. Just that path. Just that one line of flattened fibers between the window and the door. The landlord said it was from the cleaning crew. From the carpet rollers. I nodded. Sure. I went home. I stood in my apartment and I listened. That evening, the sound started again. Footsteps. The creak of floorboards. A cabinet. The sounds of someone moving around in the apartment directly below mine. In the vacant apartment. In the apartment I had just stood in and confirmed was empty. I stopped eating dinner. I sat on the floor in the center of my living room and I listened to every sound that came from below. Footsteps that moved from what would have been the bedroom toward the kitchen. A pause. Then back. Then to the window side of the room, which I now knew was that worn path in the carpet. A long stillness. Then the faint, creaking movement of weight shifting. The sound of someone who stands at a window and looks at something outside for a long time. I went to my window and looked out at the street below. It was quiet. Parked cars. Street lights. Empty sidewalk. And in the second floor window, directly below mine, a face looking up. I stumbled back from the window. When I looked again, there was nothing. Just the dark glass of an empty apartment reflecting the streetlight. I called the landlord. He came over. He went through 2B again. Nothing. No one. I started recording. I set up my phone on the floor with a sound recording app and went to bed. In the morning I played back the recording from the night. For the first 2 hours, my own sounds. My footsteps, my shower, my TV. Then, around 11, silence. Then, clearly, distinctly, a rhythmic creak from below. Footsteps. Movement. Not imagined. Not pipes. Movement, in a specific pattern, back and forth across a floor, for nearly an hour. Then silence. Then, at 2 a.m., a single sound I had not heard before. Coming from directly below my bedroom. A soft, slow knock on the ceiling below me. Which was the floor above whoever was in 2B. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. As if something below was trying to get my attention. As if it had finally decided to make itself known. I moved out within the week. I didn't explain fully to the landlord. I just left. I've thought about it many times since. About that face in the window. About the flattened path in the carpet that someone had worn down by pacing it hundreds of times. About the knocking. But mostly I think about this: if the building had been fuller, if other tenants had been there, I never would have heard those sounds below me. The noise of a full building would have drowned them out. Whatever was in that apartment had been there the whole time, probably long before I arrived. Patient. Quiet. Able to exist in the empty space of an unoccupied apartment without anyone ever knowing. It had survived on the absence of people. And when the building emptied out, when the sound of normal life drained away and left silence, it finally had quiet enough to move around. To pace its path. To find the window. To knock. I was 23 years old and working a night shift at a small data facility in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I mean it. The building was a squat, gray, single-story structure on a flat patch of land outside a town so small it didn't appear on most GPS maps. The facility was accessed by a 2-lane road that ran 8 miles through empty farmland before it reached the main highway. No street lights. No traffic at night. Nothing for miles in any direction but flat ground and the occasional cluster of trees. I worked the overnight shift alone. Midnight to 8. 3 nights a week. My job was simple: monitor the system panels, do hourly walkthroughs of the server floor, call the on-call technician if any alerts triggered. Most nights nothing triggered. I sat at the desk in the front room, drank coffee, read, and did my rounds on schedule. I had done it for 8 months without a single unusual incident. The job paid well for what it was. The isolation didn't bother me. I am, by nature, someone who needs quiet. I liked the feeling of being the only person awake for miles. It felt like ownership of the night. That feeling ended on a Tuesday. I was doing my 3 a.m. round. Front room, equipment corridor, server floor, back corridor, return. Standard. 8 minutes total. I'd walked it so many times I could do it without thinking. I had my clipboard, my flashlight hooked to my belt loop though all the lights were working, my phone in my pocket. I was in the back corridor, the long straight section that ran along the rear of the building, when I heard it. My name. Spoken clearly. From somewhere behind me. I stopped and turned around. The corridor was empty. Fluorescent lights. Painted concrete floor. Nothing. I waited. Listened. Nothing. I told myself I had imagined it. The building had a faint, constant hum from the servers that sometimes played tricks with ambient sound. I'd thought I'd heard things before. Voices in the white noise. I'd read about that, how our brains pull patterns from random noise, especially when we're sleep-deprived and alone. I finished my round and went back to the front desk. At the 4 a.m. round, it happened again. This time I was in the equipment corridor. Halfway down the row of mounted panels, I heard my name again. Same voice. Clear, not shouted, just spoken at a normal conversational volume. Coming from behind me, or from above, or from everywhere at once. The kind of voice that doesn't seem to have a clear direction because it's too close, or because it's somehow inside the room's air. I turned and saw nothing. I stood there for a long time. My hands were cold. I walked the rest of the corridor quickly and stood at the end, in the open space by the rear door, and I just breathed. The rear door had a small reinforced window. Through it, I could see the rear of the property. Gravel, a security light on a pole, flat land extending to a line of trees a few hundred yards out. There was a person standing at the tree line. Standing completely still. Just at the edge of where the security light reached. They were a dark shape, just barely visible, the way something is visible when you're right at the edge of seeing it. But they were there. Facing the building. Facing me. I moved away from the window. I went to the desk and called the on-call manager. He was groggy and irritable and told me it was probably a deer. I told him it was upright on 2 legs. He said it was probably a person who had pulled off the road to relieve themselves. He told me to lock the exterior door, which was already locked, and to call 911 if anyone tried to enter the building. He hung up. I did not go back to the rear window for a long time. But around 5 a.m., I forced myself. Security light still on. Gravel, pole, flat land, tree line. Nobody there. The 5 a.m. round I did fast, professionally, not allowing myself to stop or react to anything. Front room, equipment corridor, server floor, back corridor. All clear. Back to the desk. At 6:30 a.m., with the sky starting to go gray outside the front windows and less than 2 hours left in my shift, I heard my name one more time. This time it wasn't in the building. It was outside the front door. Just on the other side of the glass. A voice saying my name, quietly, conversationally, the way a person says a name when they're standing right next to you and trying to get your attention. I looked up at the front door. The security camera feed for the front entrance was on one of the monitors on my desk. I looked at the monitor. The front entrance was empty. I looked at the door. Gray morning light. Nothing. The parking lot beyond it, my car, the road disappearing into the flat landscape. Nothing. Nothing. I drove home at 8 a.m. in full daylight and I called in sick for my next 2 shifts. When I went back, I requested the day shift. My supervisor asked if everything was okay. I said yes, some personal schedule issues. He approved the change without questions. I worked days after that until I found a different job 4 months later. The thing I've never been able to explain is the voice. Not what it was or where it came from. I've made my peace with not knowing those things. People hear things. The mind does strange things in isolated, sleep-deprived, low-stimulation environments. I can explain the voice. What I can't explain is this. I never told anyone at that job my first name. My badge said my last name only. My supervisor used my last name. The on-call log had my last name. The emergency contact form had my last name. I had worked there 8 months and operated entirely under my last name. The voice at the front door, that last time, didn't say my last name. It said my first name. My full first name. The one I hadn't told anyone there. It said it the way someone says a name they've always known. Familiar. Comfortable. Like they'd known me a long time. Like they'd been waiting a long time to finally say it to my face. My grandmother's farmhouse sat on the edge of a large open field, and on the other side of that field, maybe 200 yards away, was another house. I never questioned the other house growing up. It was just there. Old. 2 stories. White paint gone gray over the years. All the windows dark. My grandmother called it the Heller place, after the family that had lived there a long time ago. She never said much else about it, and I never asked. It was the kind of thing that exists in a child's world as pure background. Furniture. Landscape. Unimportant. I went to stay with my grandmother the summer I was 26. She was getting older. I wanted time with her. I stayed for 6 weeks and slept in my old childhood bedroom, the one with the window that looked out directly across the field toward the Heller place. On my 3rd night there, I was lying awake at around 1 in the morning, unable to sleep due to the heat. My bedroom had no air conditioning, just the window screen and whatever breeze chose to come through. I was watching the ceiling when something made me turn toward the window. The Heller place was dark, same as always. Except for one window on the 2nd floor. A dim light. Not a flashlight, not a phone screen. Something softer, like a candle or a low lamp placed far back in the room. Just enough to show that the window wasn't pure black like all the others. I sat up. I stared at it. I told myself it was a reflection. Moonlight, or a passing car on the distant road, caught in the glass. But the angle was wrong for any of those things, and the light was warm-colored and steady, not a reflection. Someone had a light on in the Heller place. I watched it for maybe 15 minutes. It didn't move. It didn't flicker in a way that suggested a candle. It just burned, low and steady, in the 2nd floor window of a house that had been empty for as long as I had been alive. I didn't wake my grandmother. She was 81 and I was not going to wake an elderly woman in the middle of the night over a light in an empty house. I watched it until I fell asleep. In the morning I asked my grandmother, very casually, about the Heller place. Who owned it now? Was there any chance someone had moved in or was using it? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that no one owned it anymore, not really. The last Heller had died in the 1980s with no heirs, and the property had been in some kind of legal limbo for decades. No one had lived there in her memory. I told her I'd seen a light in the window. She put down her coffee cup. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. She asked me which window. I described it. Second floor. Left side of the house from our vantage point. She nodded slowly. She said that was the room where old Thomas Heller had died. Back in 1981. She said he had been found in that room, in the chair by the window, facing toward her house. Facing this direction. She said the assumption had been a heart attack, nothing suspicious, an old man who had lived alone too long. She said they had found him days after the fact. I asked her why she looked like that when I described the window. She said, asterisk, because that's not the first time someone staying in your room has seen a light in that window. Asterisk. She wouldn't say more. I pushed, gently, and she changed the subject in a way that felt final. That night I watched the window again. Dark. All dark. The night after that, I set my alarm for 1 a.m. and woke up deliberately. The window was dark. I watched for an hour and went back to sleep. On my 5th night of watching, I woke at 1 a.m. and the light was back. But this time it was different. This time there was a shape in the window. Against the dim light, a silhouette. The shape of a person sitting in a chair, facing the window, facing across the field, facing my window. Facing me. I sat very still. The shape didn't move. It had the complete, settled stillness of something that has been sitting in one position for a very long time. Not the restless stillness of a person trying not to move. The deep stillness of something that has forgotten how to move. I turned on my bedside lamp. The light in the Heller Place window went out. I sat with my lamp on for the rest of the night. When I came down in the morning, my grandmother was already up. She looked at me and said, "You turned your light on?" I said yes. She nodded. She said, "He doesn't like that. He goes away when he sees a light come on over here." I asked her who he was. She said, "I don't know. But he's been sitting in that chair for 40 years. Watching this house. I think he was lonely when he was alive, and lonelier after." She said it so matter-of-factly. As if it were a normal thing to know. I slept with my lamp on for every remaining night of that visit. The window across the field stayed dark. My grandmother passed away the following winter. The farmhouse was sold. I will never go back there. But I think about that shape in the window. That deep, patient stillness. 40 years of sitting in a chair in a dark room, watching a house across a field. I wonder what it was looking for. I wonder if it found it. I wonder if, now that my grandmother's house is occupied by strangers who don't know to watch the window, the light comes back more often. I wonder if it ever left that chair at all. Or if it's still sitting there right now, in the dark, in the room where a lonely man died, watching a lit window across an empty field and waiting. Just waiting. For someone on the other side to look back. My dog, Rue, was 7 years old and had never barked at nothing. I want to establish that because it matters. Rue was a calm, quiet animal. A large mixed breed, mostly shepherd, with a deep bark she almost never used. In 7 years she had barked at real things, strangers approaching the house, a deer that wandered into the yard, a car accident she heard from 3 streets away. She did not bark at the wind. She did not bark at shadows. She was too old and too settled for that kind of anxiety. So when Rue started barking at the corner of the living room, I listened. It started in October. I was living alone in a small house I was renting while I saved money to buy. Rue and I had lived there together for a year and a half with no issues. The house was nothing unusual. Single story, 2 bedrooms, a living room that opened into the kitchen, a small backyard. A normal house. The first night, Rue woke me up just after midnight. She was standing at the bedroom door, stiff, the kind of rigid, focused tension she saved for something real. I got up and followed her into the living room. She was facing the far corner. The corner to the left of the fireplace, where the two walls met. Dark corner, only partially lit by the light I'd left on in the kitchen. She was staring at that corner and she was growling. Low. Continuous. The sound a dog makes when it has identified a specific, stationary threat and is not willing to look away from it. I looked at the corner. Shadows. The corner of two walls. The baseboard running along the bottom. Nothing there. I turned on the living room light. Rue stopped growling. She stayed tense for another moment, then shook herself and looked up at me and went to drink from her water bowl as if nothing had happened. Completely normal. Relaxed. I checked the corner. I checked the walls. I looked for mice, for gaps, for anything that could explain what she'd been responding to. Nothing. I checked the whole living room. Nothing. We went back to bed. 3 nights later, again. Same time. Same corner. Rue standing rigid, growling at nothing I could see. I started sitting with her when it happened. I'd pull the armchair to face the corner and sit there with Rue beside me and try to see or hear whatever she was perceiving. Nothing. I could feel the faint cold of the exterior wall through the plaster. A car would pass occasionally outside. Normal house sounds. Nothing in that corner. Rue would growl for 20 to 40 minutes, then stop. Every time. And every time she stopped, she'd relax completely, shake it off, and go back to normal. The pattern held for 2 weeks. Then one night it changed. Rue woke me at midnight as usual. I got up and followed her into the living room and took my place in the armchair facing the corner. Rue was at the edge of the carpet, a few feet from the corner, growling. I watched the corner. Shadows. Normal. And then, very slowly, the shadows in the corner changed. Not dramatically. Not a figure stepping forward. Just a deepening. The corner got darker than the dim light around it should have allowed. Not like something blocking the light. More like the corner itself was pulling darkness toward it, concentrating it, becoming a density rather than just an absence of light. Rue's growl changed pitch. It went lower. I cannot tell you exactly how long I sat watching that corner get darker. Time did a strange thing. My hands were on the arms of the chair and I was aware of them but couldn't make them move. My eyes were fixed on the corner and I was aware of being fixed but couldn't look away. And from the corner, very close to the floor, there was a sound. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Like something crouched very low in that corner, pressed into it, trying to be part of the wall. Rue lunged forward. Barking, finally, not growling, full barking, explosive and aggressive. She stopped at the corner, barking directly into it, hair raised along her spine. And the breathing stopped. The darkness in the corner normalized. Rue stopped barking. She sniffed the corner extensively, every inch of it, floor to waist height. Then she sat down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between exhaustion and relief. Like she had finally driven it away and needed me to understand that was what had happened. I did not sleep. In the morning, I looked at the corner in full daylight. At the very joint where the two walls met, just above the baseboard, there was a mark I had not noticed before. A thin vertical line, a few inches long, scraped into the plaster. Not a crack. Too deliberate for a crack. A line made by something moving against the plaster. Moving slowly, repeatedly, up and down in the same path. The plaster at the bottom of the mark was worn faintly concave, as if weight had been rested against it many times. The landlord, when I called, said it was just old plaster damage. Normal wear. We moved out 2 months later. Not just because of the corner, but because Rue started losing weight and sleeping excessively, and the vet said she was showing signs of chronic anxiety with no identifiable cause. She returned to normal within a month of moving. She has never growled at a corner since. I think about what it takes to stress a 7-year-old dog so severely that she starts losing weight. I think about what kind of presence requires a healthy, calm animal to stand guard for hours every night for weeks. I think about what Rue was protecting me from, night after night, in that corner. I think she was doing what she had always done. Responding to something real. And I think that if she hadn't been there, I would have been alone with whatever was using that corner. Whatever breathed in the dark. Whatever pressed itself against the wall and wore a slow, patient groove in the plaster. And I would never have known. The first call came in at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. My phone lit up on the nightstand and I rolled over half asleep to check it. The screen showed a number I recognized immediately. My own mobile number. Calling me. I stared at it for 3 rings. Then I answered. Silence. Not the silence of a bad connection, not static. Just open-air silence, the kind you can feel, as if someone was on the other end in a completely quiet room, holding the phone, breathing carefully so they couldn't be heard. I said hello. Nothing. I said hello again. Nothing. I hung up. I checked my phone for any explanation. Some kind of system glitch. I'd heard of phones calling themselves, some kind of bug, but never this late and never with the quality of that silence. I tried to call my own number back. Went to voicemail. My voicemail. My greeting. Nothing unusual. I went back to sleep and told myself it was nothing. For nights later, at 2:17 a.m. exactly, the same call. My own number. Same quality of silence when I answered. But this time, just before I hung up, I heard something. Faint. At the very edge of audible. A sound like a slow exhale. Someone breathing out. Not a glitch. Not a system error. Something deliberate. I called my carrier the next morning. They told me there was no record of a call being made from my number at 2:17 a.m. on either of those nights. As far as their system was concerned, those calls didn't happen. They checked my account for any secondary devices, any forwarding, any unusual activity. Nothing. I checked my phone's call log. Both calls were there. My number, both times, 2 minutes and 11 seconds, 2 minutes and 8 seconds. They happened. My carrier simply had no record of how. The calls continued. Every 3 to 4 nights. Always between 2 o'clock and 2:30 a.m. Always my own number. I started answering immediately, sitting up in the dark with the phone to my ear, trying to hear anything. Background. A voice. Anything. Each call had its own character. One night, distant wind, as if whoever held the phone was standing outside. One night, a very faint environmental hum, mechanical, like a generator or an HVAC system. One night, nothing for 2 minutes and then a single sound, a soft click, like a door latch catching, and then silence. I started recording the calls. I held the phone to a second phone's microphone and captured the audio. When I played them back and boosted the gain, I found things I hadn't heard in real time. The wind call had, buried in the background noise, what sounded like footsteps on gravel. Moving toward the phone. The hum call had, in the last 30 seconds, a pattern in the hum that audio processing software identified as possible speech. Slow. Very low. Indistinct. I could not make out words. But the pattern was consistent with a human voice speaking very slowly, just too quiet to resolve. The click call had, in the silence before the click, a sustained sound that I can only describe as the sound of a room. That particular ambient quality a space has when it's enclosed. As if whoever held the phone was standing in a small, closed room, waiting. I changed my number. I got a new SIM, new number, did not give the number to anyone for 2 weeks. Complete cold start. The first call on my new number came 11 days later. 2:19 a.m. My new number calling me. I didn't answer. I sat in the dark with the phone ringing in my hand and I watched my own number on the screen and I did not answer. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. No voicemail was left. I turned the phone off and sat in the dark for a long time. Here's what I know and what I don't know. I know the calls were real. My call log shows them. I know my carrier has no record of how they were made. I know that changing my number didn't stop them. What I don't know is what it was trying to say. I don't know what the footsteps were moving toward. I don't know what the slow voice in the hum was saying in that voice too quiet to hear. I don't know how it got my new number. I don't know how it will always get my number. What I think, in the part of my mind I usually keep quiet, is that it wasn't calling me. Not really. It was just using the most familiar possible number, the one I'd never ignore, the one that would always make me answer. My own number because it knew I'd always pick up. And it just wanted me to listen. To sit in the dark at 2 in the morning with the phone pressed to my ear. And hear it there, on the other end, quiet, patient, in whatever closed dark room it occupies. Breathing. I have sleep paralysis. I've had it since I was a teenager. I know what it is. I know the science. The brain wakes before the body does, and in that gap between sleep and consciousness, it can generate vivid hallucinations. Shadow figures. Sounds. The feeling of weight on the chest. I have experienced all of these. I have learned, over the years, to recognize them for what they are and wait for the paralysis to break. I am telling you this so you understand that I am not someone who jumps to conclusions about things I see in the dark. What happened during the 6 weeks I spent alone in my sister's house while she was abroad is different from sleep paralysis. I know the difference. I need you to understand that I know the difference. My sister asked me to house sit. Nice house, big house, far more space than I needed. I had the run of it. I slept in the master bedroom because it had the best mattress and the best blackout curtains. The room was large. King bed, furniture along the walls, the door to the hallway directly across from the foot of the bed. The first time it happened, I assumed sleep paralysis. I woke in the night, couldn't move, the familiar weighted feeling across my chest and limbs. My eyes were open. The room was completely dark because of the blackout curtains and the door being closed. At the foot of the bed, in the darkness, there was a figure. Standard sleep paralysis visual. Tall, dark, standing still. I've seen this before. I focused on breathing. Waiting for the paralysis to break. The figure stood there, as figures do in sleep paralysis, dark and still and present. The paralysis broke. I sat up. I turned on the bedside light. The room was empty. Normal. Completely normal. Sleep paralysis. I went back to sleep. 3 nights later, the same. Same dark room, same heaviness, same figure at the foot of the bed. I waited. The paralysis broke. Light on. Empty room. The second week, it started happening more frequently. 3 times in a week. Still read as sleep paralysis. Figure. Paralysis breaks. Empty room. Then, in the 3rd week, something changed. I woke in the night and the paralysis was there and the figure was at the foot of the bed as it had been every time. I lay still and waited for the paralysis to break. The figure moved. Not toward me. Sideways. It moved from the foot of the bed toward the right wall, slowly, silently, and stopped by the dresser. It stood there. Sleep paralysis figures do not move. That is not what they do. They stand and they oppress and they remain fixed while your panicking brain endures them. In 20 years of sleep paralysis I had never had a figure move. The paralysis broke. I turned on the light. The room was empty. But the chair that had been beside the dresser had moved. It was 6 inches from where it had been the night before. I knew exactly where it had been because I am precise about my environment. I had placed it in a specific position when I arrived and I had not moved it. I put it back. I left the light on and lay in bed for the rest of the night. The next night I set up my sister's security camera, the small one she used for traveling, pointed at the foot of the bed. I slept. In the morning I checked the footage. At 2:40 a.m., clear as daylight in the infrared, I was asleep in the bed. The room was empty. For exactly 4 minutes, the room was empty and I was asleep. Then the door opened. It opened slowly, from the hallway side. I know I had closed it. I watched myself close it on the footage. It opened, slowly, and the hallway was dark, and nothing came through the door. But the door opened fully and stood open. And then, in the infrared, the impression on the mattress at the foot of the bed changed. A slight compression. The look of weight being applied to the surface. And I, asleep, turned onto my back. And didn't move again. For 42 minutes the door stood open and the foot of the mattress showed that slight compression and I lay perfectly still on my back. Then the compression eased. The door swung slowly closed. I woke up, on the footage, at 4 a.m., and turned onto my side. I was awake during some of that. I had the experience of waking, of paralysis, of the figure. But the camera showed no figure. The camera showed an empty room and a compressed mattress and an open door and me, on my back, in the position the paralysis kept me in. I slept in the car for the remaining 3 weeks. I still have sleep paralysis. Same dark figures, same chest pressure, same fixed hallucinations that disappear when the paralysis breaks. But I have never told my sister what the camera showed, and I have never gone back to that room. Because here's the thing about sleep paralysis. Here's the thing I know from 20 years with it. You experience it alone. It's a condition of your own mind. Your brain, your body, your chemistry. There's nothing on the mattress. There's nothing at the foot of the bed. The door doesn't open. Whatever was in that room was not my sleep paralysis. My sleep paralysis had just been masking it. Every night, for years probably, something had been coming in. And my own disorder had been showing me a shadow figure in its place, a familiar and explainable thing, something I'd been trained to dismiss. A perfect disguise. Right there at the foot of the bed. And I had been telling it, every time, not to worry. I know what you are. I've seen you before. Go back to sleep. Nobody should be at a lake house in November. That's what I was told when I told people my plan. Take 2 weeks off, drive up to my uncle's empty lake house, decompress, be alone with the trees and the cold water and no phone signal. People said it would be depressing. People said it would be boring. People said November was the wrong month for that kind of solitude. Nobody warned me about what November does to a lake house. How the sounds change when the summer families leave and the lake goes quiet. How sound travels across still water in November. How far? How clearly? I arrived on a Sunday. The house was cold but sound. Heat came on fine. The generator worked. My uncle had stocked the kitchen with basics before I arrived, and I'd brought 2 weeks of provisions. I had a stack of books, a journal, and no agenda. For the first 4 days, it was everything I'd wanted. Cold air and quiet and the smell of wood smoke and the absolute absence of anyone else. The lake was flat and gray and perfect. I wrote in the journal. I slept long nights. I felt my shoulders come down from where they'd been living near my ears for months. On the fifth night, I heard the boat. Late, after midnight. A small motor, the kind on a flat fishing boat, coming across the lake from the far shore. I heard it clearly from my bedroom. The motor would run, then cut, then run again. Moving slowly. Getting closer. I went to the window. The lake was dark. No moon, overcast. I couldn't see anything. But I could hear it. Coming closer. Then it stopped. The motor cut and there was silence. Whatever it was had stopped somewhere out on the lake. Maybe 100 yards out. Maybe less. I watched the darkness for a long time. Nothing. I told myself fishermen kept odd hours. Ice fishermen started early. Nothing unusual. I went back to bed. In the silence, I heard the boat rock. Small sounds, the knock of wood, the faint slap of water against a hull. Just sitting out there in the dark. I slept. In the morning I walked the dock. The lake was empty. Gray water, far shore, bare tree line. No boats. Nothing. The fifth night, the sixth night, the seventh. The boat came each time. Always after midnight. Always the motor cutting somewhere out on the lake. Always that patient rocking in the dark, out there just beyond what I could see, whatever was in it not moving, not continuing across, just sitting. On the eighth night I stood on the dock with a flashlight. The beam reached maybe 60 feet. I swept it across the water. Nothing. Darkness. The beam at its edges just dissolved into the black of the lake. I called across the water. I said, "Is someone there?" My voice went out across the water and I heard the particular emptiness of a voice over open water, and there was no response. Just the faint sound of water and the boat rocking in the dark outside my light. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table. About an hour later, from the water side of the house, I heard a sound I had not heard before. Something bumping against the dock. I sat very still. The bump again. Gentle. The kind a boat makes when it drifts up against a dock. Rocking water, repeated contact. Whatever had been out on the lake had come in. I didn't go to the window. I sat at the kitchen table in the lit kitchen and I listened. The bump continued for a while. Then it stopped. Then I heard sound from the dock itself. Not water sounds. Not the house settling. Footsteps on the wooden dock boards. The specific, hollow, resonant sound of a person walking on a dock. Coming toward the house. They stopped at the place where the dock met the shore. The silence that followed was enormous. I held my phone. I had no signal, but I held it. I sat at the kitchen table and I did not make a sound and I listened. 15 minutes of silence. Then the dock sounds again. Footsteps going the other way. Back toward the water. The bump of a boat against the dock. The sounds of someone getting into a boat. The lap of water as it moved away. Then, far out, the small motor starting. Running. Running. Then cutting off. I left in the morning. I told my uncle I'd had enough solitude earlier than expected. He laughed. He said it happened to everyone. A month later I told him about the boat. He stopped laughing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told me something he said he should have told me before I went. 3 years earlier, in late October, a man had drowned in that lake. Local man, lived on the far shore, used to fish that lake his whole life. They found the boat drifting, his tackle spread across the surface, but they never found him. The lake was deep and cold and November lake water keeps what it takes. My uncle said he'd heard from neighbors that some nights, since then, you could hear a motor out on the lake after midnight. I asked him why he hadn't told me before I stayed. He said he didn't think I'd actually hear it. He said most people didn't. He didn't explain what was different about the ones who did. He didn't need to. Because I've thought about it since, and I think I understand. Some people sit in a lit house and hear a boat and go back to sleep. Some people go out to the dock and shine a light. I think whatever is out on that lake, whatever comes in from the dark water and walks to the edge of the shore and stands in the silence listening, I think it comes back for the ones who go out to the dock. The ones who call across the water. The ones who say, "Is someone there?" Because now it knows there is. I found the photograph in a box of things my mother left me when she passed. It was a standard box, personal items, old documents, things she'd kept for reasons of her own that I was left to sort through alone. Most of it I recognized. Her jewelry. Letters from her sister. Old birthday cards. The small, tender archaeology of a life. The photograph was at the bottom of the box. An old photo, black and white, printed on the thick paper stock that means it was taken a long time ago. It showed a house I recognized. The house I grew up in. Taken from across the street, from the angle of the sidewalk. Our front door, the old maple tree in the yard, the porch light, all unmistakable. It was a night photo. You could tell by the quality of the dark, the way the porch light created a circle of illumination on the steps, the way everything beyond the light fell quickly into black. My mother was in it. Much younger, maybe late 20s, standing at the top of the porch steps. Looking toward the camera. She looked normal. She didn't look alarmed. She just looked. I studied the photo for a long time. I turned it over. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, a date. May 1987. I wasn't born until 1989. I thought about who might have taken this photo and given it to her. An old friend. A boyfriend. Some night from her life before me that she'd kept and never explained. I set it aside. I went through the rest of the box. I came back to it hours later. I don't know why I looked more closely. Something pulled me back to it. I picked it up and looked again at the house, at my mother on the steps, at the dark street behind the camera's position. In the window. The front window of the house, to the left of the door, the window that looked into the living room from outside. In that window, lit faintly by the interior, there was a figure. Standing at the window. Looking out. My mother was on the porch. The photo was taken from across the street. Someone else was inside the house, standing at the window, looking out at the street. I brought the photo to better light. I looked carefully. The figure was clear enough. An adult. Standing at the glass. Face toward the street, toward the camera, toward wherever the photographer stood across the road. I called my aunt, my mother's sister, the only one left who would have known my mother's life in 1987. I described the photo. She was quiet for a moment. She asked if there was a man in the window. I said yes. She was quiet for longer this time. Then she said she remembered something. That summer, 1987, my mother had told her she kept seeing a man in the neighborhood she didn't recognize. Walking past the house slowly. Standing on the sidewalk across the street at odd hours. Never approaching. Never speaking. Just watching the house. My mother had been frightened enough that she told a friend who had started walking past occasionally to check on her. My aunt assumed eventually it had stopped. My mother had never brought it up again. I asked her if my mother had ever described the man. She said, tall, dark clothing, thin. I looked at the figure in the window. Tall. Dark clothing. Thin. I looked at my mother on the porch steps, looking toward the camera, apparently unaware of the figure in the window behind her. And then I realized something I should have seen immediately, something that my mind had simply refused to form into a coherent thought when I first looked. My mother is on the porch. She is outside. She is looking at the camera from across the street. She is outside. The house behind her, the house she is standing in front of, is our house. If she is outside, the person in the window is inside our house. Inside. In our home in 1987. Standing at the window. Looking out at the street. In the house my family lived in. In the house I was later brought home to as a newborn. In the house I grew up in. In the house I lived in until I was 18. I asked my aunt if my mother had ever figured out who the man was. She said no. She said my mother had stopped talking about him and she had assumed the problem had gone away. I asked one more question. I asked my aunt if she thought the man my mother had seen outside the house was the same man who had been found inside it. She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, quietly, that she didn't know. That she had never known. That there were things about that year she had never fully understood. That my mother had never liked to talk about that summer. And that the year after, when I was born, my mother had insisted on putting locks on every window in the house. Every single window. On the inside. I still have the photograph. I've looked at it many times. I've looked at the man in the window, that dark, thin figure standing in the light of my childhood home, looking out at the street, looking at whatever was out there in the dark. Looking at the photographer. Looking at whoever was standing across the street at night, taking photographs of our house. I look at the two of them, the figure in the window and the anonymous photographer, both watching. One inside, one out. Both in the dark. Both silent. And I wonder which one my mother knew about. And which one had been there all along without her knowing. And whether, in all those years that I was growing up in that house, going to sleep in my room, living my childhood in those rooms, whether the man in the photograph was ever really gone. Or whether he was simply more careful after that. More quiet. More patient. Knowing, now, to stay away from the windows.